The bullet that shattered the window of the general store in Globe, Arizona, missed Adelaide Norton's head by 3 inches. And in that moment of frozen terror, she knew her father's gambling debts had finally caught up with their family. It was late September 1883, and the copper mining town nestled in the Pinal Mountains had become a place where Adelaide felt increasingly unsafe. Her father had been dead for 2 weeks, shot down in the street by men he owed money to, and now those same men seemed determined to collect from his daughter. Adelaide was 22 years old, had worked as a schoolteacher for the past 4 years, and possessed exactly $17 to her name. The debt her father left behind amounted to nearly $300, an impossible sum that might as well have been $3,000. She dropped to the floor behind the counter as another shot rang out, this one splintering the door frame. Mr. Henderson, the store owner, was visiting family in Phoenix, leaving Adelaide alone to manage the store on her Saturdays. The arrangement had been a blessing, giving her extra income, but now she cursed her decision to come in today. "Come on out, Miss Norton," a voice called from outside. She recognized it as belonging to Frank Tully, one of her father's creditors. "We just want to have a conversation about settling accounts." Adelaide's hands trembled as she crouched behind the wooden counter. She had heard what happened to women who could not pay their debts. Some ended up working in saloons under circumstances they never chose. Others simply disappeared. Her father had been a fool, a drunk, and a gambler. But he had been all she had left after her mother died of fever 5 years ago. The sound of boots on the wooden boardwalk outside made her heart hammer against her ribs. She looked around desperately for another exit, but the back door was across the store, requiring her to cross open space. The afternoon sun slanted through the broken window, casting sharp shadows across the floor scattered with broken glass. Then she heard different boots, heavier, more purposeful. A new voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter. "I believe the lady said she was not interested in conversation, Tully." Adelaide risked a glance over the counter. A tall man stood in the street, positioning himself between the store and Tully's gang. He wore dusty trail clothes, a worn leather vest over a blue shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. 2 revolvers sat on his hips with the casual ease of someone who knew how to use them. His face was partially shadowed by his hat, but she could see a strong jaw covered in a few days of stubble. "This is none of your concern, stranger," Tully said, his voice taking on a nervous edge. "Just business between us and the girl. See, that is where you are wrong." The stranger's voice was calm, almost conversational, but there was steel underneath. "I am making it my concern. Now you boys can mount up and ride out, or we can settle this another way. Your choice." Adelaide counted 4 men with Tully. The stranger stood alone. The odds seemed impossible, yet he stood there with complete confidence, his hands hanging loose at his sides. "You know who we work for?" Tully asked. "Malcolm Greer does not take kindly to interference." "Cannot say I care much about Malcolm Greer's feelings," the stranger replied. "I am counting to 5. 1. Now hold on. 2. Tully's hand moved toward his gun. The stranger's hands became a blur. 2 shots rang out so close together they almost sounded like one. Tully's gun went flying from his hand before he could even clear leather, and the man next to him yelped as his gun belt was shot clean off his waist. 3, the stranger said, his guns already reholstered as if the previous 2 seconds had not happened. "Want me to keep counting?" The 4 men scrambled for their horses, Tully cradling his hand, which Adelaide hoped was only bruised. They thundered out of town in a cloud of dust, leaving only silence behind. Adelaide stood on shaking legs, one hand pressed to the counter for support. The stranger turned toward the store, and she finally got a good look at his face. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with brown hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that were a startling blue-gray, like storm clouds. His face was weathered by sun and wind but handsome in a rough-hewn way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. "You hurt, miss?" he asked, stepping into the store. His eyes scanned the broken window and scattered glass with professional assessment. "No, Adelaide found her voice catching. "Thank you, they would have. I do not know what they would have done." "Nothing good," he agreed. He removed his hat, revealing more of that brown hair. "Name's Yates Emerson, madam. Just rode into town an hour ago looking for work. Seems I arrived at an opportune time." "Adelaide Norton," she managed. "I apologize for the trouble. My father, he left debts." "Not your trouble to apologize for," Yates said firmly. "Man's debts die with him, far as I am concerned. Those men got no legal right to harass you." "Legal and actual are two different things in Globe," Adelaide said bitterly. She began picking up pieces of broken glass, needing something to do with her hands. "Malcolm Greer runs half this town. He owned my father's markers. The sheriff will not go against him." Yates watched her for a moment, then knelt down to help gather the glass. "You got family elsewhere, somewhere you could go?" Adelaide shook her head. "No one. My mother was an only child, and my father's family disowned him years ago when he started drinking. I have my teaching position, my room at the boarding house, and that is all." "Teaching does not pay much," Yates observed. $30 a month," Adelaide confirmed. "And whatever Mr. Henderson pays me for helping here on Saturdays. It is enough to live on, but not enough to pay $300, especially not with the interest Greer keeps adding." They worked in silence for a few moments, depositing glass into a crate. Adelaide found herself acutely aware of the stranger's presence, the way he moved with careful efficiency, the surprising gentleness of his large, work-roughened hands as he handled the dangerous shards. "You said you were looking for work," she said finally. "What kind of work do you do, Mr. Emerson?" "Yates, please," he said. "And I do whatever needs doing. Ranch hand mostly. Can break horses, mend fences, handle cattle. Did some scouting for the cavalry a few years back. Even worked as a deputy for a spell, though I am better suited to open range than town politics. I am afraid Globe does not have much to offer right now," Adelaide said apologetically. "The copper mines are laying men off, and most of the ranches around here have full crews." Yates stood, dusting off his hands. "Might be I will stick around a few days anyway. Man who rides out right after helping a lady in distress might give folks the wrong impression." Adelaide felt warmth flood her cheeks. "Mr. Emerson, Yates, I appreciate what you did, but you do not owe me anything. Greer will not forget what happened today. Staying in Globe could be dangerous for you." "Miss Norton," Yates said, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "I have been riding alone for 3 years now, ever since my father passed and I sold our ranch in New Mexico. Been drifting from town to town, job to job, never staying long enough to put down roots. Gets lonely, that kind of life. Maybe I am tired of running. Maybe I am ready to stand still for a spell, especially if it means making sure you stay safe." "You do not even know me," Adelaide whispered. "No, madam, I do not," Yates agreed. "But I know men like Tully and Greer. I know what they do to people who cannot fight back. And I know that when I saw you through that window, terrified but trying to be brave, something in my chest got real tight. Maybe that makes me a fool, but I have been called worse." Adelaide opened her mouth to respond when the sound of approaching horses made them both tense. Yates's hand dropped to his gun, but then relaxed as an older man in a sheriff's badge rode up with 2 deputies. "Heard there was shooting," Sheriff Dalton said, his eyes taking in the broken window and then landing on Yates with obvious suspicion. "Who are you?" "Man who stopped 4 armed men from terrorizing a woman in broad daylight," Yates said evenly. "Where were you?" The sheriff's jaw tightened. "You got a smart mouth, stranger. Want to tell me what happened here?" Before Yates could respond, Adelaide stepped forward. "Frank Tully and 3 other men from Greer's outfit tried to force their way in here, Sheriff. They were shooting at me. This man, Yates Emerson, intervened and sent them running. He saved my life." Sheriff Dalton looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Now, Miss Norton, I am sure there has been some misunderstanding. Your father owed Mr. Greer a considerable sum. My father is dead," Adelaide said, her voice harder than she had known she could make it. "Whatever he owed died with him. Those men had no right to threaten me, and you know it." "Law's not always clear-cut in these matters," the sheriff said weakly. "Then maybe you need a new sheriff," Yates said quietly. "One who remembers who he is supposed to protect." The 2 men stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Sheriff Dalton looked away. "I will have a word with Mr. Greer about his men's behavior. Miss Norton, you should be more careful. These are dangerous times." He rode off with his deputies, leaving Adelaide trembling with anger and residual fear. "Useless," she said. "Worse than useless. He is in Greer's pocket." "Seems that way," Yates agreed. He looked at the broken window. "Going to be dark soon. You should not be here alone, and this place needs boarding up. You know where I can find some lumber." Over the next hour, Adelaide showed Yates to the lumber pile behind the store, and he set about boarding up the broken window. She watched him work, struck by his quiet competence. He measured twice, cut once, and had the window secured before the sun began its descent toward the mountains. "That should hold until Mr. Henderson gets back," Yates said, testing the boards. "Though you should send him a telegram about what happened. He deserves to know his store was shot up." "I will send it first thing Monday," Adelaide promised. She hesitated, then added, "I finish teaching at 3 o'clock. I could meet you after, and I suppose I should buy you supper as thanks." Yates smiled, and Adelaide felt that odd tightness in her chest that he had described. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges. "I would like that, Miss Norton. Would like that very much." "Adelaide," she said. "If I am calling you Yates, you should call me Adelaide." "Adelaide," he repeated, and the way he said her name with that slight Western drawl made something flutter in her stomach. "Pretty name, suits you." They walked together to the boarding house where Adelaide rented her room. Mrs. Fletcher, the proprietor, eyed Yates with interest when Adelaide explained what had happened. "You can stay here," Mrs. Fletcher declared. "Got a room open on the first floor. 30 cents a night, meals included. Any man who stands up to Malcolm Greer's outfit is welcome under my roof." "Obliged, madam," Yates said. That night, Adelaide lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling around her. She kept seeing Yates in the street, facing down 4 armed men without hesitation. Kept hearing his voice saying that something in his chest had gotten tight when he saw her. She had long ago given up on the stories she used to read as a girl, the ones where handsome men swept women off their feet and carried them away to happy endings. Real life was not like that. Real life was watching her mother die slowly of fever while her father drank away his grief. Real life was scraping by on a teacher's salary, living in a single room, wearing dresses she had mended so many times the original fabric was hard to find. Real life was men like Malcolm Greer who thought they could do whatever they wanted to whomever they wanted. Love was a fairy tale, and Adelaide had stopped believing in fairy tales when she was 15 years old and had to bury her mother with money borrowed from neighbors. But when sleep finally claimed her, she dreamed of storm-colored eyes and a smile that made the sun seem brighter. The next morning was Sunday, and Adelaide attended services at the small church on the edge of town. She was surprised when Yates appeared, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. He sat in the back, hat in his hands, and she felt his eyes on her throughout the service. Afterward, Reverend Michaels introduced himself to Yates and invited him to the church social that afternoon. Adelaide found herself hoping Yates would accept. "I am not much for socializing," Yates told the Reverend politely, "but I thank you for the invitation." "You should come," Adelaide said before she could stop herself. "The ladies bring food, and it is a chance to meet people in town. If you are staying for a while, I mean." Yates looked at her, and something in his expression softened. "Well, if you are going to be there, I suppose I could make an exception." The church social was held under a grove of cottonwood trees near the creek that ran through the edge of Globe. The ladies of the town had outdone themselves with covered dishes, and children ran playing games while the adults talked. Adelaide had brought her specialty, a dried apple pie that always went quickly. She introduced Yates to several people, watching as he spoke easily with the men about ranching and horses, and tipped his hat respectfully to the ladies. He had an easy manner about him, friendly without being forward, and people seemed to take to him naturally. "That the man who stood up to Frank Tully?" asked Martha Green, the banker's wife. She was a formidable woman in her 50s who had never been afraid to speak her mind. "Yes, madam," Adelaide confirmed. Martha looked Yates over appraisingly. "About time someone did. Malcolm Greer has been running roughshod over this town for too long. Your young man might want to watch his back, though. Greer does not forget slights." "He is not my young man," Adelaide protested, feeling her cheeks heat. Martha said, her eyes twinkling. "The way he keeps looking over here, I would say he has different ideas about that. And the way you are blushing, I would say you might not be entirely opposed." Adelaide wanted to protest further, but Martha had already moved away, leaving her flustered. She busied herself cutting slices of pie for people, trying not to think about how Yates kept glancing her way, or how her heart did that odd little skip every time their eyes met. As the afternoon wore on, Yates finally made his way over to her. "Save me a slice of that pie?" he asked. "Might have," Adelaide said, surprising herself with a playful tone she had not used in years. She handed him a generous slice. "Fair warning, I am not the best baker in town." Yates took a bite and his eyes closed appreciatively. "Madam, I have eaten trail rations for weeks at a time. This tastes like heaven." They found a spot under a tree, sitting on the grass that was still green from the summer monsoons. Adelaide found herself relaxing in his presence, the tension she had carried since her father's death easing slightly. "Tell me about New Mexico," she said. "What made you leave?" Yates was quiet for a moment, watching the children play. "My father built that ranch from nothing. Came out after the war, staked his claim, and worked himself nearly to death making it prosper. I grew up helping him, learning everything he knew. When he died, I tried to keep it going, but—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "Truth is, without him there, the heart went out of it for me. Every fence post, every pasture, every room in that house reminded me he was gone. I sold it to a neighbor who had been wanting to expand, took my inheritance and started riding. Told myself I was looking for a new place to settle, but really I was just running from grief." Adelaide understood that all too well. 3 years is a long time to run. "It is," Yates agreed. "But maybe I was running towards something instead of just away. Maybe I had to ride all those miles, work all those different ranches, sleep under all those different stars, to end up in Globe on the exact day when a brave schoolteacher needed someone to stand up for her. Adelaide's throat tightened. I was not brave. I was terrified. Brave and terrified are not opposites, Yates said. Real courage is being scared out of your wits and keeping going anyway. You have been doing that since your father died, have you not? Going to work, holding your head up, refusing to let Greer's threats break you. I did not have much choice. There is always a choice, Yates said. You could have run, could have left town in the night and tried to disappear somewhere. But you stayed, because you have responsibilities and students who need you and your own sense of what is right. That is brave, Adelaide. The way he said her name again, gentle and certain, made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. She blinked them back quickly, not wanting to cry a church social, but Yates had already noticed. He reached over and took her hand, his palm warm and calloused against hers. It is all right to be scared, he said softly, and it is all right to let someone help carry the weight for a while. I am not used to accepting help, Adelaide admitted. After my mother died, my father, he fell apart. I had to be the strong one. Had to make sure we had food, that the rent was paid, that he did not drink away every penny. I have been taking care of things for so long, I do not know how to do anything else. Then maybe it is time you learned, Yates said. His thumb rubbed gentle circles on the back of her hand, and Adelaide found she did not want to pull away. Starting with letting me walk you home after this social ends. As the sun began to set and families packed up their baskets, Yates did exactly that. They walked slowly through town, neither of them in a hurry to end the day. The evening air was cooling, carrying the scent of wood smoke and the distant smell of the copper smelters. What will you do about Greer? Yates asked as they neared the boarding house. I do not know, Adelaide admitted. Keep teaching, keep working for Mr. Henderson, try to save money. Though I do not think Greer will wait for me to save $300. What if you did not have to? Yates said carefully. What if someone paid off the debt? Adelaide stopped walking. No, absolutely not. I will not accept charity, and I especially will not accept that from you. You have done more than enough already. It is not charity if it is an investment, Yates said. An investment in what? Yates turned to face her, his expression serious in the gathering dusk. In you, in the possibility that maybe I am tired of drifting. That maybe I want to find a reason to stay somewhere, to build something again. You said Globe needs workers. What if I found work here, regular work, and we came to an arrangement? What kind of arrangement? Adelaide asked warily. The kind where I pay off your father's debt to Greer, and you pay me back over time. No interest, no pressure. You keep teaching, keep living your life, but without looking over your shoulder all the time. And I stay in Globe, find work, and see if this town might be a place where I could put down roots. Why would you do that? Adelaide whispered. Yates reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Because yesterday, when I saw you through that window, something clicked into place that has been rattling loose inside me for 3 years. Because talking to you today was the most alive I have felt since my father died. Because I am hoping that maybe if I stick around, you might give me a chance to see where this could go. Adelaide's heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. This is crazy. We just met. I know, Yates said. Believe me, I know how it sounds. I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow or make any promises. I am just asking for a chance. Let me pay off Greer. Let me stay in town and court you proper, and we will see what happens. If it turns out I am just another drifter and you are better off without me, you can pay me back every penny and I will move on. But at least give it a try, Adelaide. Give us a try. Every rational part of Adelaide's brain was screaming that this was foolish, that she barely knew this man, that people did not do things like this. But her heart, that part of her that had locked itself away years ago, was singing a different tune. "All right," she heard herself say. "All right, Yates Emerson, we can try." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise over the mountains, bright and full of promise. He took her hand again, raised it to his lips, and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You will not regret this, Adelaide Norton. I swear it." Monday morning. Yates went to see Malcolm Greer while Adelaide taught her class of 20 children ranging from 6 to 13 years old. She tried to focus on the lessons, on helping little Emma Martinez with her letters and listening to Samuel Fletcher read from his primer. But her mind kept drifting to Yates and what was happening across town. Greer owned the Silver Strike Saloon, the largest gambling hall and drinking establishment in Globe. He also had interests in several mines, owned property throughout town, and ran a small empire of questionable legality. He was a big man gone to fat, with mutton chop whiskers and cold eyes that calculated the value of everything and everyone. Yates walked into the Silver Strike at mid-morning when the place was nearly empty. Just a few die-hard gamblers at the tables and a bartender wiping down the bar. The bartender, a thin man with nervous hands, pointed to a door at the back when Yates asked for Greer. The office was thick with cigar smoke and decorated with expensive furniture that seemed out of place in a frontier town. Greer sat behind a massive desk, Frank Tully standing behind him like a loyal dog. Tully's right hand was bandaged. "Mr. Emerson," Greer said, not getting up, "I have been expecting you. Heard you made quite an impression Saturday." "I came to settle Adelaide Norton's debt," Yates said without preamble. He pulled a leather pouch from his vest and set it on the desk. $300. Consider it paid in full." Greer did not touch the pouch. 300 was what her father owed. "With interest and the trouble his daughter has caused, I would say the debt is closer to 500 now." "Interesting mathematics," Yates said coolly. "The way I hear it, the original debt was 200. You have been adding interest at a criminal rate, and Adelaide Norton has not caused any trouble. Your men have been harassing her, which is a different matter entirely. You got a lot of opinions for a stranger who just rode into town," Greer said, his voice taking on an edge. "I have been around long enough to know when someone is trying to shake down a woman with no protection," Yates replied. 300 is generous. Take it or leave it, but either way, Adelaide Norton is under my protection now. Your men come near her again, we will have a different kind of conversation." Tully stirred behind Greer, but the older man held up a hand. He studied Yates for a long moment, then pulled the pouch across the desk and opened it. He counted the money slowly, making a show of it. $300, Greer finally said. "I suppose that settles Robert Norton's markers, but you should know something, Emerson. I run this town. The sheriff works for me, half the town council is in my pocket, and I do not forget when someone crosses me. You might have fast hands, but you are just one man. Accidents happen in mining towns." "They do," Yates agreed. "A man could get hurt walking down the street, could get shot from ambush. But here is the thing about accidents, Greer. They can happen to anyone. Even someone sitting in his office thinking he is untouchable. You want to leave Adelaide alone and go about your business, we will not have any problems. You want to make this personal, I guarantee you will regret it." The two men stared at each other across the desk. Finally, Greer laughed, though it did not reach his eyes. "You got sand, I will give you that. Fine. Adelaide Norton's debt is paid and I have no more business with her. But you, Emerson, you have just made yourself an enemy. You should have kept riding." "Probably," Yates agreed. "Never was much good at doing what I should." He walked out of the Silver Strike with his heart pounding but his steps steady. He had just spent most of the money from selling his father's ranch, money he had been carrying around for 3 years like a safety net. Now it was gone, invested in the possibility of something he could not quite name but felt more right than anything had in years. He met Adelaide when she finished teaching that afternoon. She was waiting on the steps of the one-room schoolhouse, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. When she saw him approaching, she stood quickly. "Well," she asked, settled, Yates said. "Greer agreed the debt is paid. He is not happy about it, but it is done." Adelaide's eyes filled with tears. "I do not know how to thank you. Do not thank me yet," Yates said gently. "I might have just made things more complicated. Greer is not the forgiving type." "I do not care," Adelaide said fiercely. "For the first time since my father died, I do not feel like there is a noose slowly tightening around my neck. That is worth complications." Over the following weeks, Yates settled into life in Globe. He found work with a rancher named Thomas Yates, no relation, who owned land south of town and needed help preparing for the winter months. The work was hard but familiar, and Yates fell into the rhythm of it easily. Every evening, after Adelaide finished teaching or working at the general store, they would meet and walk together. Sometimes they went to the creek and sat watching the water flow past. Sometimes they climbed to the top of one of the hills overlooking town and watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Sometimes they simply walked through Globe streets, talking about everything and nothing. Yates told her about growing up in New Mexico, about his mother who had died when he was 12, about learning to rope cattle and break horses from his father. He told her about the years after he sold the ranch, about working in Colorado and Texas and Nevada, about sleeping under the stars and never feeling like he belonged anywhere. Adelaide told him about her childhood before her mother got sick, when her father had been different, happier. She told him about discovering her love of teaching, about the satisfaction of watching a child's face light up when they finally understood a difficult concept. She told him about her dreams of maybe one day opening a proper school building instead of the cramped, one-room structure they used now. They talked about books they had read, places they wanted to see, what they thought the future held for the West as it grew more civilized. They argued good-naturedly about whether coffee or tea was better in the morning, whether summer or winter was the best season, whether dogs or horses made better companions. And slowly, carefully, they fell in love. It was not the dramatic, sweeping romance from the novels Adelaide had read as a girl. It was quieter than that, built on conversations and shared silences. On the way, Yates always seemed to notice when she was tired and steered her toward a place to rest. On the way, Adelaide learned to read his moods from the set of his shoulders and the crinkle around his eyes. 6 weeks after they met, Yates kissed her for the first time. They were at the creek, sitting on a flat rock with their feet dangling over the water. The November air was cool but not cold, and the cottonwoods had turned golden, their leaves rustling in the breeze. Adelaide had been telling him about one of her students who was struggling with arithmetic when she noticed he had gone quiet. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Just looking at you," Yates said softly. "The way the sunlight catches in your hair. The way your whole face lights up when you talk about your students. You are beautiful, Adelaide." Adelaide's breath caught. She had never thought of herself as beautiful. Pretty on a good day, perhaps, but beautiful seemed like a word for other women, women who had not spent their youth caring for sick mothers and drunk fathers. "Yates." She started, not sure what she meant to say. He reached over and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I am going to kiss you now, if that is all right." Adelaide could only nod, her heart in her throat. The kiss was gentle, almost tentative, as if Yates was afraid she might break. His lips were warm and soft, and Adelaide felt something inside her unfurl like a flower opening to the sun. When they pulled apart, she was breathless. "Been wanting to do that for weeks," Yates admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "Why did you wait so long?" Adelaide asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Yates smiled. "Wanted to make sure you felt the same way. Wanted to give you time to be certain. This is not just a drifter passing through, Adelaide. I am staying. I bought land from Thomas yesterday, 20 acres adjoining his property. Going to build a house, start my own herd. I am planting roots here, and I wanted you to know that before things went any further between us." "You bought land." Adelaide felt dizzy with the implications. "But what about my debt to you?" "What about it?" Yates said. "You can pay me back whenever you are able. No rush. I have got work, I have got prospects, and I have got the woman I love sitting next to me. I would say my investments are paying off pretty well." "The woman you love," Adelaide whispered. "Yes," Yates said simply. "I love you, Adelaide Norton. I think I started falling the moment I saw you behind that counter, scared but defiant. I know it is fast. I know people will say we are rushing. But when something feels this right, I do not see the point in pretending otherwise." Adelaide felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but for once they were happy tears. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both strange and perfect on her tongue. "I thought I had forgotten how to love, how to trust anyone, but you make me want to believe in good things again." They kissed again, longer this time, and Adelaide felt like she was rewriting all her old stories about love and fairy tales. This was not some prince on a white horse sweeping her off to a castle. This was a cowboy with calloused hands and a kind heart, offering her a partnership, a future built together through hard work and devotion. The next morning, Yates asked her to marry him. It was early, just after sunrise, and Adelaide was leaving the boarding house to head to the schoolhouse. Yates was waiting on the porch, hat in his hands, looking nervous in a way she had never seen him. "Morning," he said. "I know you have to get to work, but I have been up all night thinking, and I figure I should just say this before I lose my nerve." "Say what?" Adelaide asked, her heart beginning to pound. "Marry me," Yates said. "I know we have only known each other a couple of months, and I know it is fast, but I am 30 years old and I have seen enough of the world to know when something is worth holding on to. You are worth holding on to, Adelaide. I want to build that house on my new land and fill it with you and whatever future we can make together. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to be the man who stands beside you through whatever comes. So marry me, please." Adelaide's hand went to her mouth. Around them, Globe was waking up. Someone was opening the shutters at the general store. A rooster was crowing. The morning stage was rumbling into town, normal life continuing while her world tilted on its axis. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Yates, I will marry you." The smile that broke across his face was brilliant. He picked her up and spun her around right there on the boarding house porch, not caring who saw. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly enough that Mrs. Fletcher, watching from a window, fanned herself and declared to the other boarders that young love was a beautiful thing. They were married 3 weeks later, on a cold December morning with snow dusting the mountains. Reverend Michaels performed the ceremony in the little church, with what felt like half of Globe in attendance. Adelaide wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her, and carried a bouquet of dried flowers that Martha Green had kept from her own wedding 30 years before. Yates wore a new suit that he had bought specially, and when he saw Adelaide walking down the aisle, his eyes got suspiciously bright. Adelaide felt like she was floating, like at any moment she might wake up and find this was all a dream, but it was not a dream. It was real, solid, true. When Yates slipped a simple gold band on her finger and promised to love and cherish her all his days, Adelaide felt something settle deep in her soul, some piece of her that had been wandering finally coming home. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at the church with food and music. Someone had brought a fiddle, and there was dancing. Yates was not a particularly graceful dancer, but Adelaide did not care. She let him lead her around the makeshift dance floor, laughing when he stepped on her toes, feeling happier than she could remember being in her entire life. As the evening wound down, they said their goodbyes and headed to the small house that Thomas had let them use until their own place was built. It was a simple 2-room cabin at the edge of his property, but Adelaide thought it was perfect. That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Yates's arms around her, Adelaide whispered, "I never thought this would happen for me. I never thought I would find someone who made me feel safe and loved and like the world was full of possibilities. I never thought I would find a home again after I sold the ranch," Yates replied, his breath warm against her hair. "But you are my home now, Adelaide. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." They spent the winter months in the borrowed cabin while Yates worked on building their house. He worked with Thomas during the day managing cattle, and in the evenings and on Sundays, he cleared land and laid the foundation for what would become their home. Adelaide continued teaching, and now that she was married to Yates, she found the other women of Globe more welcoming. Martha Green took her under her wing, teaching her recipes and giving advice about running a household. Mrs. Fletcher treated her like a daughter. Even some of the miners' wives, who had been standoffish when Adelaide was a single woman struggling alone, now invited her to quilting circles and church functions. Malcolm Greer kept his distance, though Adelaide sometimes felt his eyes on her when she passed the silver strike. Yates had been right that Greer did not forget. There were small acts of petty vengeance, like Thomas suddenly having trouble getting credit at the feed store that Greer partially owned, or Adelaide hearing rumors that she was teaching inappropriate subjects in her classroom. But nothing that could not be managed, nothing that compared to the terror of those weeks after her father's death. In early March, Yates pronounced their house complete enough to move into. It was not fancy, but it was solid and well built, with 2 bedrooms, a main room with a fireplace, and a kitchen that made Adelaide exclaim with delight. Yates had even built a covered porch where they could sit in the evenings. "I will add on as we need," Yates promised as he carried her over the threshold. "Maybe a bigger kitchen, another bedroom or 2. "For children?" Adelaide asked shyly. They had not talked much about children yet, though she knew she wanted them. "For as many children as you want to give me," Yates said, setting her down and kissing her forehead. "This house has good bones. It can grow with our family." Their first night in their own home, Adelaide stood at the window looking out at the star-filled sky. She could see the lights of Globe in the distance, but here they were far enough away to feel like they had their own small world. Yates came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Happy?" he asked. "So happy I am afraid I will wake up," Adelaide admitted. "6 months ago I was alone and terrified, convinced my life was over before it really began. Now I have you and this house, and a future that looks nothing like what I imagined but somehow better." "You saved yourself," Yates said firmly. "I just gave you a hand up. Everything else, the teaching, the respect you have earned in this town, the life we are building, that is all you, Adelaide." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and was answered by another. The desert night was alive with sound and possibility. Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers covering the hills around their property. Adelaide discovered she was pregnant in late April, and the joy on Yates's face when she told him made her cry. He was immediately overprotective, insisting she rest more, worrying about her riding horses or working too hard in their growing garden. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Adelaide laughed as Yates fussed over her one evening. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "Not my woman," Yates said stubbornly. "Not my wife carrying my child. You let me worry, Adelaide. It is my job." Their son was born in January of 1885, during a cold snap that had Yates frantically keeping the fire roaring while Martha Green and Mrs. Fletcher attended to Adelaide. It was a long labor, and there were moments when Yates, listening to Adelaide's cries from the next room, thought he might go mad with worry. But finally, wonderfully, there was a different cry, the thin wail of a newborn. Martha appeared in the doorway, smiling broadly. "You have a son, Yates. A healthy boy, and Adelaide is fine. Tired, but fine." Yates rushed into the bedroom where Adelaide lay exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Look," she said softly. "Look what we made." The baby had a shock of dark hair and eyes that would eventually turn the same storm gray as his father's. Yates sat on the edge of the bed, carefully taking his son in his arms, and felt his throat get tight with emotion. "He is perfect," Yates whispered. "What should we call him?" They had discussed names, but now, looking at their son, Adelaide said, "Robert, after my father. He made mistakes, but he gave me life and he loved me in his way. I want our son to have that name to maybe redeem it." "Robert Emerson," Yates said, testing it out. "Bobby, it is a good name." Young Robert thrived, growing strong and healthy. Adelaide took 6 months away from teaching to care for him, then returned to the classroom while Mrs. Fletcher watched the baby during the day. It was exhausting, managing teaching and motherhood and being a rancher's wife, but Adelaide had never been happier. Yates's ranch grew steadily. He was a shrewd cattleman, careful with his money and smart about which stock to buy. Thomas became not just his neighbor but his closest friend, the two men working together on larger projects, helping each other during busy seasons. Within 2 years, Yates had expanded his original 20 acres to nearly 100, with a healthy herd and a growing reputation as a fair dealer. Globe continued to grow as well. The copper mines brought more people, and with them came the need for better schools, more churches, proper stores. Adelaide found herself at the center of efforts to build a new school building, leveraging her friendship with Martha Green and other influential women to raise money and gather support. In the summer of 1887, when Bobby was 2.5, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant again. This time, Yates was slightly less panicked, though he still fussed over her endlessly. Their daughter was born in March of 1888, during a thunderstorm that Bobby watched from the window with wide eyes while his father paced and worried. They named her Caroline Marie, and she had Adelaide's dark hair and delicate features, but Yates's stubborn chin. From the moment she was born, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. Yates, who could stare down armed men without flinching, turned to putty when his daughter smiled at him. "You are going to spoil her," Adelaide said, watching Yates rock Caroline to sleep one evening while Bobby played with carved wooden animals on the floor. "That is my right as her father," Yates said unrepentantly. "Bobby gets to be tough and learn ranching. Caroline gets to be a princess if she wants." "Caroline gets to be whatever she wants to be," Adelaide corrected. "That is what we are building here, Yates, a place where our children have choices." The new school building was completed that fall, a proper 2-story structure with separate classrooms and real desks instead of makeshift benches. At the dedication ceremony, Adelaide stood with Yates and their children, looking at what had been accomplished, and felt pride swell in her chest. She had become something in Globe, someone people respected and came to for advice. She was not just the schoolteacher anymore. She was Mrs. Emerson, rancher's wife, mother, community leader. She sat on committees for the church and helped organize charity drives for struggling families. She had transformed from a frightened young woman with no prospects into someone who shaped her town's future. But more than any of that, she was happy. Deeply, truly happy in a way she had never imagined possible during those dark days after her father's death. Malcolm Greer's influence waned over the years. As Globe became more established, the rule of men like him became less tolerated. A new sheriff was elected, one who actually enforced the law fairly. The territorial governor began paying attention to corruption in mining towns, and Greer found himself investigated for various schemes. He eventually left Arizona entirely, some said for California, others claimed Mexico. Either way, Globe was better for his absence. The years rolled on, bringing changes and challenges. There was a drought in 1889 that tested every rancher in the area, but Yates and Thomas worked together, sharing resources and information, and both their herds survived. There was a diphtheria outbreak in 1890 that terrified Adelaide until she was sure both her children would be spared. Bobby started school in the new building, sitting in his mother's classroom and trying very hard to not get special treatment. In 1891, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant again, surprising both of them as they had thought their family complete. Their second son, Thomas William, named for Yates's friend and Adelaide's late mother's father, was born in January of 1892. He was a quiet baby, content to watch the world with solemn eyes that missed nothing. Yates turned 40 in 1893, and Adelaide organized a surprise party that brought half of Globe to their ranch. Thomas gave a speech about the first time he met Yates, how he had known immediately that this was a man you wanted as a friend and neighbor. Martha Green told embarrassing stories about Adelaide's early days teaching, when she had been so nervous she sometimes lost her place in lessons. Bobby, now 8 years old, stood up and declared that his father was the best rancher in all of Arizona, which made Yates's eyes get suspiciously bright. That night, after the guests had left and the children were asleep, Adelaide and Yates sat on their porch in the rocking chairs he had built. The desert spread out before them, silvered by moonlight. "Can you believe it has been 10 years?" Adelaide asked. 10 years since that day you walked into town and changed everything." "Best day of my life," Yates said, "even though I did not know it at the time. Thought I was just stopping to rest my horse and maybe find a few days' work. Instead, I found you." "I thought love was a fairy tale," Adelaide said softly, reaching over to take his hand. "I thought happiness was for other people, people whose fathers did not drink away their futures and leave them drowning in debt. I had given up on the idea that life could be anything but surviving day to day." "And now?" Yates asked, though he knew the answer. He just liked hearing her say it. "Now I know that fairy tales are real. They just look different than the stories say. They look like a cowboy with quick hands and a kind heart who saw a scared woman and decided she was worth fighting for. They look like building a home together, board by board. They look like children sleeping safely in their beds and a ranch that grows a little more each year. They look like this, Yates. You and me, still holding hands after 10 years, still choosing each other every day." Yates brought her hand to his lips and kissed it, the gesture as familiar now as breathing. "You were never a fairy tale I read, Adelaide. You were the story I got to write, and you let me write you as my ending. Best thing I ever did." They sat together as the stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had looked down on them that first night in their little house, the same stars that would look down on their children and grandchildren in years to come. The desert wind whispered through the mesquite and carried the scent of sage. Somewhere, a night bird called. Life continued its steady pulse around them. Bobby graduated from Adelaide School when he was 16 and immediately went to work full-time on the ranch with his father. He had Yates's steady hands and Adelaide's quick mind, and together they made plans to expand into horse breeding alongside the cattle operation. Caroline, 12 years old, announced she wanted to be a teacher like her mother, and Adelaide began tutoring her in the subjects she would need. Thomas, at 9, was still figuring out his path, but he loved books and could often be found reading in improbable locations. In 1899, Adelaide retired from teaching. She was 41 years old and had taught for over 20 years. The school board threw her a retirement party that filled the entire school building. Former students, now grown with children of their own, came to thank her for what she had taught them. The new teacher, a young woman fresh from a training college in Phoenix, looked terrified and excited in equal measure. "You will be wonderful," Adelaide assured her. "Just remember, you are not just teaching reading and arithmetic. You are showing these children that learning opens doors, that education is the path to choosing your own future." Retirement suited Adelaide. She threw herself into ranch work, managing the books and correspondence that Yates had always found tedious. She started a lending library in Globe, donating books and organizing it in a small room off the general store. She finally had time to focus on her own children's education, to take long rides with Yates across their land, to simply sit and watch the sunset without feeling guilty about lessons she should be planning. The turn of the century came, and with it, a sense that the wild days of the West were fading into memory. Automobiles were starting to appear, though they were rare and considered more novelty than practical transportation. There was talk of Arizona becoming a state rather than just a territory. The railroad that had come through Globe years before made the town feel more connected to the rest of the country. But some things remained constant. Yates still rose before dawn to check on the herd. Adelaide still made coffee exactly the way he liked it. They still sat on their porch in the evenings, rocking in companionable silence or talking about everything and nothing. They still reached for each other in the night, still knew each other's moods and thoughts with the ease of long partnership. Bobby married in 1902, choosing a girl named Sarah from a neighboring ranch. Adelaide and Yates watched their son take his vows and felt the bittersweet pride of parents seeing their child begin his own journey. When Bobby and Sarah's first child, a daughter they named Adelaide, was born in 1903, Adelaide held her tiny granddaughter and felt the circle of life complete itself. Caroline did become a teacher, taking over Adelaide's old position at the school in Globe. She was 21, confident and capable, and Adelaide watched her daughter stand in front of a classroom and felt immense pride. Thomas, now 18, announced he was going to Tucson to study law, wanting to be part of shaping Arizona's future as it moved toward statehood. "We made good humans," Yates said one evening after Thomas left for school. It was just the two of them again in the house, the way it had been years ago before children filled the rooms with noise and life. "We did," Adelaide agreed. "Three very different people who are all going to make their mark on the world." "Takes after their mother," Yates said. "She took on the world and won." "No," Adelaide corrected gently. "We took on the world together and won. That is the difference, Yates. I could not have done any of this alone. You gave me the foundation to build on, the safety to take risks, the partnership to weather the storms. We won together." As the years continued their march, Adelaide and Yates settled into the comfortable rhythms of older age. Yates was 53 in 1906, still strong and capable but with silver threading through his brown hair and lines deepening around his eyes. Adelaide was 48, her dark hair now streaked with white, her face showing the marks of a life well lived. They added more grandchildren to their growing family. Bobby and Sarah had 3 children in total. Caroline married a fellow teacher in 1908, and they had twins in 1910. Even Thomas, who they thought might remain a bachelor married to his law books, came home from Tucson in 1909 with a wife and news that he was opening a practice in Globe to serve the community as they prepared for statehood. Arizona became a state in 1912, and Thomas was there in Phoenix when the official papers were signed. He came home with stories of the celebration, the speeches about how far the territory had come, the bright future ahead. Globe threw its own party, and Adelaide and Yates watched from their usual spot on the porch as fireworks lit up the sky. "Remember when this was truly wild country?" Adelaide asked. "When sheriffs could be bought and men like Malcolm Greer ran things however they wanted." "I remember," Yates said. "Remember thinking it was a hard place for a woman alone to survive." "Then you changed that," Adelaide said. "You and men like Thomas, like the new sheriff, like all the people who decided Globe could be better than it was. You helped civilize this place, Yates." "We civilized it," Yates corrected. "You with your school teaching children to read and think. Me with trying to be a fair dealer, treating people right. That is how places change, Adelaide. One person at a time, one good choice at a time, until suddenly you look around and realize the whole world has shifted." In 1914, Adelaide developed a persistent cough that worried everyone. The doctor, a young man trained in modern medicine back east, examined her and prescribed rest. Yates refused to let her do any heavy work, taking over even the household tasks when she protested. "You took care of your father when he was falling apart," Yates said firmly. "You took care of me and our children for decades. Now it is my turn to take care of you, and I will not hear any arguments." The cough eventually faded, but it left Adelaide weaker than before. She was 56 now, and for the first time she felt her age. Yates, at 61, still moved with much of his old strength, but he stayed close to the house more, unwilling to leave Adelaide alone for long. Their children and grandchildren visited often. Bobby ran the ranch now, having gradually taken over as Yates stepped back. Caroline brought her twins every Sunday for dinner. Thomas and his wife lived in town but came out whenever they could. The house that had once seemed so spacious now felt full of life whenever everyone gathered. "We built something good," Adelaide said one evening in 1917. She was sitting in her rocking chair, a blanket over her lap, even though it was only early October. "Look at what came from that day you walked into the general store. Children, grandchildren, a ranch that supports 2 families, students I taught who are now teachers and lawyers and ranchers themselves. Ripples, Yates, we made ripples." "You made ripples," Yates said. "I just loved you." "That was enough," Adelaide said softly. "Your love was enough to change everything." They celebrated their 33rd anniversary in December of 1917. Bobby and Sarah hosted a party at their house, the whole family gathering along with friends from Globe. Adelaide tired quickly, but she smiled throughout the evening, watching her grandchildren play, listening to the conversations swirling around her. That night, back in their own bed, Yates held Adelaide close. 33 years, he murmured. "Best years of my life." "Mine too," Adelaide whispered. "Even the hard ones, especially the hard ones because we faced them together." Adelaide passed away in her sleep on a February morning in 1918. Yates woke to find her gone, looking peaceful as if she had simply drifted away during the night. He sat holding her hand for a long time. unable to quite process that she was really gone, that the woman who had been his partner, his love, his home for 34 years would never open her eyes again. The funeral drew people from all over the territory. Former students, now middle-aged with children of their own, fellow teachers, ranchers Yates had worked with, women Adelaide had served alongside on various committees. The little church was packed, with people standing outside listening to the service through the open doors. Bobby spoke about his mother's strength, the way she had balanced being a teacher, a rancher's wife, and a mother without ever making any of them feel less important than the others. Caroline talked about how her mother had shown her that women could shape the world, that education was power and compassion was strength. Thomas, his lawyer's eloquence serving him well, spoke of Adelaide's impact on Globe, how she had helped transform a rough mining town into a real community. But it was Yates, standing at the end, who captured what Adelaide had truly meant. His voice was rough with grief, but steady. My wife believed that love was a fairy tale, something that did not happen to real people in the real world, he said. She had given up on the possibility of happiness, of partnership, of someone standing beside her through the storms. When I met Adelaide 34 years ago, she was scared and alone, facing down men who wanted to hurt her. I helped that day, but she is the one who saved both of us. She gave me a reason to stop drifting, a place to plant roots, a future worth building. Adelaide thought love was a fairy tale, but she let me rewrite that story with her as my ending. And what an ending it has been. 34 years of waking up next to my best friend. 3 children who are better than either of us deserved. Grandchildren who will carry her forward into the future. A life full of purpose and meaning and joy. That was Adelaide's gift to everyone who knew her. She showed us that love is not a fairy tale. It is better than any fairy tale because it is real and hard and wonderful all at once. They buried Adelaide in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Globe, with a view of the mountains she had loved. Yates stood at the graveside long after everyone else had left, one hand resting on the fresh earth. "I will see you again," he whispered. "I do not know when or how, but I will. You wait for me, Adelaide. Wait for me like you did that first day, standing behind that counter, brave even when you were terrified. I will come for you. I promise." Yates lived for 7 more years, years that felt hollow without Adelaide. He moved in with Bobby and Sarah, unable to bear the house where every corner held memories. He spent his days working with the horses, teaching his grandchildren to ride, sitting on the porch and watching the desert seasons change. He never remarried. When people suggested it, gently, thinking he was lonely, he shook his head. "I had my great love," he would say. "Lightning does not strike twice, and I would not want it to. Adelaide was enough for one lifetime." He talked about her constantly, stories that his grandchildren never tired of hearing, how they met. Their first kiss by the creek. The day they moved into the house he built. Bobby's birth. Caroline's first steps. Thomas learning to read. The lean years and the good years. The laughter and the tears. The everyday moments that had made up a life together. On a warm May morning in 1925, Yates died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72. Bobby found him in his chair on the porch, Adelaide's photograph clutched in his hand, a slight smile on his weathered face as if he could see something wonderful just ahead. They buried him next to Adelaide, as he had requested. The entire town of Globe turned out for the funeral. Yates Emerson had become a respected figure over his 42 years in the area, known for his fairness, his integrity, his devotion to the wife he had loved and lost. Bobby placed his father's best hat on the coffin before they lowered it into the ground. Caroline left a bouquet of wildflowers, the kind Adelaide used to pick, Thomas, ever the lawyer even in grief, read a passage from a letter his father had written shortly before he died, putting his affairs in order. "I am ready to go," Yates had written. "I have lived a good life, longer than many men get, and I have been blessed beyond measure. 3 children who make me proud, grandchildren who will carry our family forward, a ranch that will support generations to come. But most of all, I had Adelaide. For 34 years, I woke up next to the love of my life. That is more than most men ever get, and I will be grateful for it until my last breath. I am not afraid of dying. I am going home to my wife, and that thought brings me nothing but peace." The years rolled on. Bobby ran the ranch until he was too old, then passed it to his oldest son. Caroline taught for 40 years before retiring, touching lives the way her mother had. Thomas became a judge, known for his fairness and wisdom. They all carried Adelaide and Yates forward in their choices, their values, the way they treated others. The ranch stayed in the Emerson family, expanding over generations. The house Yates built, that first home he had made for Adelaide, was preserved as the heart of the property even as additions and improvements were made around it. Great-grandchildren played in rooms where Adelaide had rocked her babies. Great-great-grandchildren learned to ride horses in the pastures Yates had cleared. Globe continued to grow and change. The copper mines eventually played out, but the town reinvented itself. The school where Adelaide taught became a historical landmark. The general store where Yates first saw her was eventually torn down, but a plaque marked where it had stood. And on the hill overlooking it all, 2 headstones stood side by side. Adelaide Norton Emerson, 1861–1918, beloved wife, mother, teacher. Yates Emerson, 1853–1925, beloved husband, father, friend. The inscriptions were simple, but to those who knew the story, they represented something profound. A woman who had given up on love, a cowboy who had shown her it was real. 2 people who had found each other on a desperate day and built a life together that rippled out through time, touching hundreds of lives, creating a family that would carry their legacy forward for generations. Adelaide had thought love was a fairy tale, something for storybooks and songs, but not for real life. Yates had rewritten that story, taking a frightened schoolteacher and a drifting cowboy and crafting a tale of partnership, devotion, and enduring love. He had made her his ending, but really, they had created an ending together, one that was better than any fairy tale because it was true. Years later, when Bobby was an old man himself, his own great-grandchildren would ask him about his parents. He would take them to the cemetery on the hill, show them the 2 headstones, and tell them the story. About the day his father rode into Globe looking for work and found a purpose instead. About his mother standing behind that counter, terrified but refusing to break. About a love that started with a gunfight and grew into something that shaped a family, a ranch, a town. "They gave us all of this," Bobby would say, gesturing to the valley below where the ranch stretched across the landscape. "But more than land or money or legacy, they gave us an example. They showed us that love is not just a feeling, it is a choice you make every day. It is standing beside someone through drought and debt, through children being born and children leaving home, through good years and lean years and everything in between. That is what real love looks like. Not a fairy tale, but something better, something true." And in that way, Adelaide and Yates lived on, in the stories told by their descendants, in the values they instilled that were passed down through generations, in the ranch that still bore the Emerson name. In the town they had helped build into something better than it was. Love is not a fairy tale. It is harder than that, more complicated, full of mundane moments and everyday challenges. but it is also better than any fairy tale, because it is real and chosen and built day by day through commitment and care. That was what Adelaide learned in the 34 years she had with Yates. That was the story they wrote together, a cowboy and a schoolteacher who met on a day of violence and fear and chose to create something beautiful instead. Their story ended, as all stories must, with death parting them. But the ripples they created continued, wave after wave spreading out through time. Children taught to read became teachers themselves. Fairness in business dealings became a family tradition. The idea that love was worth fighting for, worth building on, worth choosing every single day, that became the foundation on which generations of Emersons built their lives. Adelaide thought love was a fairy tale, something that did not happen to real people in the hard world of the 1880s Arizona Territory. Yates Emerson proved her wrong, rewrote the story with her as his ending, and together they created something that outlasted them both, a love story that was true in every sense of the word. And if you had asked either of them, in those final years they had together, whether they had any regrets, they would have said no. Not about the hardships they faced or the struggles they endured or the uncertain future they gambled on. Because they had taken a chance on each other, and that chance had paid off beyond measure. That is what love is in the end. Not a fairy tale, but a story you write together, one choice at a time, one day at a time, until suddenly you look back and realize you have created something extraordinary. Adelaide and Yates wrote their story across the red rocks and vast skies of Arizona, and it was a story worth telling for generations to come.